At one stage, the Jews of Prague were under threat from the Christians outside. And they built themselves a golem, which was a huge monster. And a rabbi breathed life into that golem. The golem went out, acted against all the local Christians who were trying to destroy the Jews. He defended the Jews against everybody. But then the golem became too powerful and started destroying everything around him. And it began to destroy the people themselves. So they had to destroy the golem, or else they would not have survived. They would destroy the golem before it destroyed the Jewish people of Prague. And for many of us, Israel is now a golem. It's one of them. It is likely to destroy the Jewish people.
There's a sense that a lot of Jews feel proud of the achievements of the State of Israel. They don't feel, they use the Holocaust and they feel ashamed of what happened in the Holocaust. After the war, they used to say things like, they went like sheep to the slaughter. Now, in fact, that meant they almost absolved the people who hurt them, who destroyed them. They absolved those people and blamed the victim. And I remember after the war what they used to say with such pride about Israel. They used to say, the new Jew, that's the new Jew and the new anti-Semitism and the new this and the new that. That means dismissing our past, dismissing our history. Who was the new Jew? The new Jew was blonde and blue-eyed and carried a gun. He was. As if there was a shame of being brown-eyed, brown-haired, and not violent. And as if, and I always used to think, who is blonde, who is blue-eyed, carries a gun, and that was the Aryan. And that means that to a large extent, it was almost like the Stockholm Syndrome. My name's Diana Neslen. I'm an 84-year-old South African-born Jewish anti-Zionist. I was born to, I think, a reasonably wealthy middle-class family in Cape Town, South Africa. I was the second of two children. My elder sister had special needs. I was born at the beginning of the war, 1939 I was born. So I was aware as a very young child of the Holocaust because it was very much a source of conversation in the household that I lived. We moved from central Cape Town to the suburbs when I was quite young, and I was educated in white-only schools. I was also educated in Jewish religious schools outside my secular education. My family were quite religious, and we belonged to the synagogue in Cape Town. My father became the president. My contemporaries and the people I was friendly with were all Jewish. We didn't mix with non-Jews. You don't recognize what's wrong with it initially. It seemed reasonable to live in a society where white people had privileges and we were looked after by brown people. There was cook and a helper and a gardener and all sorts of people who managed the household, and they lived outside in a little separate building with their own toilet facilities. It was during my adolescence that I began to recognize the reality of South Africa, but I had already recognized what had happened to Jewish people in the war, and that had a deep and lasting impact on me. The whole sense of the fact that my people were destroyed because of who they were, and it left an indelible mark on me that somehow Jewish people could be targets for death, not for anything they'd done, but for whom they were. The impact of the Holocaust affected me to the extent that I began to look carefully at the world I lived in and could see that, in fact, the people who were of a different colour were less privileged than I was. It seemed wrong that I had servants and other things. It also seemed wrong that I had privileges that my sister couldn't have either. So there were lots of areas of inequality in my life. Zionism was quite, most Jews were Zionists. We used to get the regular paper which was called the Zionist Record, and I joined a Zionist youth group and felt very much at home there. Because of the time was there was a ferment of anti-colonialism and socialism and things like that. It was the end of the 50s, and and in this group, they talked about socialism and they talked about something anti-colonialism, and Israel was looked on as was sold to us as some sort of place that you could visit and would meet your critical needs, because Israel had the ingathering of the exiles, i.e. they brought people from the Middle East, from the East, from the Arab countries and from North Africa to Israel, and showed that this was not a racist society, as we began to realize that South Africa was. I grew up virtually in a Jewish Zionist movement. But I was also very much an anti-racist. I didn't like white privilege, and I recognized I had that there. So we were all, we were encouraged to get ready to go and settle in Israel. They had a very strong push, Israel at that time, to get Western Jews to come to Israel. And I was a Western Jew, and and they didn't want, they were not interested in people. They brought in people from the Middle East and North Africa, but why they brought them in was to fill the void of the Palestinians they had expelled and dispossessed. While I was at university studying, we went with a group to Israel. I think it was 2 or 3 months in the end of 58, 59, to live on a kibbutz to meet Israelis and to eventually be inducted into that milieu. Didn't have that effect on me. I did not feel at home in that country. I felt uncomfortable. And I began to read what happened, the stories I wasn't told, because we were told heroic stories about how we'd built the land. And I became even more anxious and worried and concerned because my identity had been wrapped up in this ideology. I don't think it's one thing. It's not one thing that changes your views. It's very hard if your identity has been constructed around an ideology. It feels as if you're losing yourself a little bit. It's very hard to sort of shed it. And it is a very warm, encompassing movement, like all movements. It engages you, it embraces you, all that sort of thing. And to leave it, it's like you're like a snail without a carapace. You feel as if you haven't got anything to hang on to. But there were more things than that. I didn't reject it completely. I visited again with my mother in 1963, and we went, which was interesting, we went at the time of the independence celebrations. And I found the militarization, I shrunk back from it. It was all militarization and army and all this sort of thing. And what it reminded me mostly of was I'd visited France during and I think France was still during the Algerian War, and everywhere there were soldiers, and that was the same. It felt the same colonial sense. I mean, I didn't have the language to decide, but I still didn't feel comfortable. My family were quite racist against the Mizrahi Jews and so forth. And I didn't feel very comfortable. And I came back and I met my husband, and he came from a very, very different background. He came from the Bundist background. His family were Bundists. They were very strong Bundists. And he was very much anti-Zionist. He never was a Zionist. He was also anti-religious. He was a secular Jew very strongly, but very committed to Jewish life and Jewish people. And then came the 6-Day War. And that was the turning point for me, because it was then I saw what happened in Jerusalem at the Kotel. They destroyed all the houses. I saw the refugees streaming out. And I thought, this is going to go on and on. This is the direction of travel. And it's a direction I don't want to travel in. And from then on, I was an anti-Zionist, and I stopped believing at all in Israel. And I say anti-Zionist because, well, maybe first non-Zionist, but slowly, more and more, it became clear to me that the ideology was indeed very suspect, and I regard it very toxic. And so but it's a very lonely place, because everyone, all the people I'm mixed with and everybody, they were all Zionists. But my husband and I weren't. He was strongly anti-Zionist. He was strongly anti-nationalist. The thing about South Africa was black people, anyone who wasn't white was unable to vote. They did not have any control over where they lived because there was the Group Areas Act. They could be pushed out. I lived in Cape Town. There was a place called District 6. I'd like to read you something about District 6. I'll just get it.
Oh, hold on a sec. Let me unplug you.
District 6 was, the people there were removed. And I'd like to read this poem because it talks about dispossession, and it's universal, really. Remember District 6. Remember the racism which took away our homes and our livelihood, and which sought to steal away our humanity. Remember also our will to live, to hold fast to that which marks us as human beings, our generosity, our love of justice, and our care for each other. Remember Tramway Road, Mudderdam, Simonstown. In remembering, we do not want to recreate District 6, but to work with its memory of hurts inflicted and received, of loss, achievements, and of shames. We wish to remember so that we can all, together and by ourselves, rebuild a city which belongs to all of us, in which all of us can live, not as races, but as people. And I think that's a very powerful poem about what it means to be displaced and what the alternative to displacement is, and how only as equal people can we work together. But it wasn't only the Group Areas Act, it was the fact that you were separated in education. I could be educated in a fine school. If you were a different colour skin, you were educated in crowded places. You weren't able to take employment as you wanted because work was designated for whites, you know, and black people had other. They were according to apartheid, they were hewers of wood and drawers of water. There was also the Immorality Act. You couldn't marry someone who was the wrong race. They brought in the Bantustan Act, put black people in various parts of the country so that 13% of the land was able to be controlled by various tribes. There was a lot of divide and rule, so they divided the tribes. And all the laws were created to set in stone the whole sense of division and apartheid, that you could never rise above it. You were always black, you were always mixed race, you were always Indian, or you were always white. And if you were white, you were privileged. And what I found in Israel is exactly the same. You're a privileged person. If you are not Jewish, your house can be destroyed. Palestinian schools have less money spent on them, and their education system, they're not allowed to learn their history, they're not allowed to learn about Nakba, nothing. So that, in a sense, they are denying them their rights. And that's even in what we call 67 Israel. Never mind the occupied territories. Now, to me, the occupied territories are exactly the same as the Bantustans, where you have no control, except that, unfortunately, Abbas and the PA act as agents for Israel. South Africa actually invested in the Bantustans. Israel, in fact, uses the occupied territories as a dumping ground for their goods, and also withdraws, for instance, the stones and from Palestine are withdrawn, the water is taken. They take away, they extract from the occupied territories, and in fact, in terms of apartheid, when we see what's going on today in Gaza, I just have to think about the effect of Sharpeville, which was 60 people killed by shot in the back. And look what's happening now. It's an absolute genocide, and yet Israel is allowed to get away with it. So, I mean, to me, there's no comparison. Israel is far worse than the South Africa I knew, because they will, as I think Moshe Makova says, the black people were a resource. They were the workforce for the white South Africans, whereas in Israel they don't need Palestinians. They need what the Palestinians have, namely their land. So, so in fact, to them, it's very much in the same way as all the colonial countries, and that you destroy the native inhabitants, indigenous inhabitants. They are of no value to you, and as we now see, they have no human capital at all for the settler colonial, and now I see them merely as settler colonial people, because interestingly enough, I see similarities with South Africa. We all left in around this 1960. A whole generation of mine left at the same time. You're seeing the same thing happen in Israel. Those who can are getting out. They have recognized there's no future in the country. Even, regardless what you've got are some extreme, and I mean, some horror. It's become a horrifying country. I look at it, it's monstrous. You do find a few people who have the moral clarity to recognize what's going on, but others are still so brainwashed that they can't see what's the reality. I have been horror-struck by this. I mean, no one with any sense of morality, humanity, can look on what's happening without absolute horror. It's unspeakable. In fact, it's very hard to find the words to express what's going on. And I think what I find so despicable is how, my thoughts are that a country that can do this cannot be revived. You've done something so terrible. To me, I think someone right in the beginning said it's the mark of Cain. Well, taking back, it is the mark of Cain. It is something so vile, so awful. And yet, it's wholly indefensible. Israel had been doing this for so long. Israel had been mowing the lawn for so long. And the world had given Israel carte blanche to do that. And I kept feeling, you are responsible. The whole world that gave Israel carte blanche is responsible for what happened here. The Israelis, although they won't allow foreign journalists into Gaza, and they're murdering the journalists from Gaza, the news is getting out. And I think this awful man on the television said Israel has lost the propaganda war. Well, it's more than that. Israel has lost its soul, and that's the reality. This morning is this terrible story of a man who went to register the birth of his twins. And he came back, his wife, who was a doctor, and the twins were dead. And of course we believe that this was a deliberate targeting, because they don't want they don't want the human capital left in Gaza. But what is even more horrifying is the fact that on Telegram there was celebration at what has happened. The Israeli, and I look on that and I say these people are absolute monsters. A lot of people have lost all faith in the politicians we have today. We believe that they are not serious, they are not people of principle or of integrity. We do what we can. We know that we are on the right side of history, but we don't know how long history will last.